The stars over Greystone, Pennsylvania, were brighter than Evie Marlowe had ever seen. At 19, she spent most of her nights lying on the roof of her family's barn, tracing constellations with her finger and imagining a world beyond the limits of her small-town existence. Her mother, tired of calling her down for dinner, had stopped asking. "You'll catch your death out there," she'd say half-heartedly, watching Evie climb the rickety ladder yet again. But Evie didn't care. The stars were her escape, her sanctuary. On a chilly October evening, as the town below her turned in for the night, Evie's life changed forever. The meteor shower had been spectacular. Evie had watched for hours, counting each streak of light as it burned through the atmosphere. But as midnight approached, she noticed something unusual, a light that didn't fade. At first, she thought it was a plane, but it moved erratically, zigzagging across the sky before slowing. Then it began to descend. Her heart pounded as the light grew brighter, descending toward the woods behind her family's property. There was no crash, no explosion, just an eerie silence. Compelled by curiosity, Evie grabbed a flashlight and made her way into the trees. The forest was quiet, the usual sounds of crickets and rustling leaves absent. When she reached the clearing, her breath caught in her throat. In the center of the clearing stood a massive structure. It gleamed like liquid metal, its surface rippling and shifting in patterns that seemed alive. Strange symbols glowed faintly along its sides, pulsing in a rhythm that made her chest ache. As she stared, frozen, a section of the structure peeled away, revealing an opening. From the darkness within, a figure emerged. It was humanoid but impossibly tall and slender, its limbs unnaturally long. Its skin glowed faintly, and its eyes burned with a green light that seemed to pierce through her. It raised a clawed hand, and before Evie could scream, a beam of light enveloped her. She was weightless, spinning, as the world around her dissolved. Evie awoke to a world that was both alien and terrifying. The room she was in pulsed with light, the walls shifting like liquid. The air was thick, filled with a low hum that resonated in her chest. She wasn't alone. Beings of all shapes and sizes surrounded her, each more grotesque than the last. Some were reptilian, their scales shimmering in the faint light. Others were insectoid, their multifaceted eyes watching her intently. A few were amorphous, their forms shifting constantly like blobs of mercury. A voice filled her mind, cold and mechanical. "You are now property of the House of Valturian. You will serve." The words echoed in her thoughts, and Evie clutched her head, trying to block them out. But the voice continued, explaining her fate with clinical indifference. The House of Valturian, she learned, was one of the most powerful factions in the galaxy, its influence stretching across hundreds of systems. They prided themselves on their conquests, enslaving beings from every corner of the universe. Evie was a prize, a rare and valuable specimen from an uncharted world. She was stripped of her humanity, treated as a commodity. Each day was a cycle of servitude and survival. But even as she endured the humiliations of her captivity, she began to observe. The ship was a maze, but its routines were predictable. The Valturians were ruthless, but their arrogance made them careless. Evie kept her head down, biding her time, waiting for an opportunity to escape. The revelation came gradually. At first, Evie thought the changes in her body were the result of the alien environment. She felt stronger, her senses sharper, her reflexes quicker. But then the truth became undeniable. She was pregnant. The news spread through the ship like wildfire. Hybrids were rare and revered among the Valturians, considered symbols of genetic dominance. Evie's status shifted overnight. She was no longer just a servant. She was a vessel for something extraordinary. She was moved to more secure quarters and given better food, though always under heavy surveillance. Her captors treated her with a strange mix of reverence and fear. The pregnancy progressed rapidly, far faster than anything Evie had ever heard of. As her body adapted, she began to notice other changes. She could sense the rhythms of the ship, almost as if she could feel its thoughts. Her captors watched her closely, whispering among themselves about the power of the child she carried. Evie resolved to protect her baby at all costs. She would escape this nightmare, no matter what it took. Evie's days on the Valturian ship stretched into weeks, then months. Though her pregnancy progressed rapidly, time on the ship was difficult to measure. The artificial light within the corridors never dimmed, and there were no stars to mark the passage of nights. Her quarters were sparse but functional, with walls that seemed to breathe and a faint hum that resonated constantly in her ears. The bed was a smooth platform of alien material that adjusted to her form, and a pulsating light on the wall served as both a source of illumination and an interface for her captors to deliver commands. Evie used her confinement to study the ship. She had learned that its walls were organic, a blend of technology and biology that seemed to adapt to its occupants. The ship was vast, with sprawling chambers that housed everything from laboratories to amphitheaters for alien rituals. She began to notice that certain parts of the ship reacted to her presence. Doors that should have been locked slid open, lights flickered in her wake, and sometimes the hum in the walls shifted to mimic the rhythm of her heartbeat. It wasn't long before Evie began testing these phenomena. She placed her hands on the walls and focused, willing them to move or change. At first, nothing happened, but as her pregnancy advanced, she felt a growing connection to the ship. Her child was influencing her, strengthening her, awakening abilities she hadn't known she possessed. She wasn't the only one to notice. The guards, hulking figures in armor that shimmered like oil on water, began whispering as she passed. Some seemed uneasy, while others regarded her with an almost reverent fear. She overheard snippets of conversation in their strange, clicking language, words that the ship translated in her mind. Her connection grows stronger. The child will be powerful. She could be the key. Evie wasn't the only prisoner aboard the Valturian ship. Though the captors kept her isolated, she occasionally glimpsed others during her limited movements through the corridors. Alien beings of various shapes and sizes, each bearing the haunted look of captivity. One day, while being escorted to a medical chamber, Evie passed a cell where a group of prisoners huddled together. One of them, a humanoid creature with luminous blue skin and eyes that glowed like twin moons, locked gazes with her. "You are not alone," the creature said, its voice resonating in her mind. The guards reacted immediately, shoving Evie forward and activating a barrier that obscured the prisoners from view. But the words lingered. That night, Evie pressed her hand against the pulsating wall of her quarters and focused, willing it to show her something. To her astonishment, an image appeared, dim and flickering but clear enough to see the same blue-skinned being she had encountered earlier. The being introduced itself as HFY, a member of a species known as the Rither. Through their telepathic connection, Kale revealed that the prisoners had been planning a rebellion for months, but lacked the means to execute it. "You," Kale said, "are different. The ship responds to you. You could give us a chance to fight back." Evie was hesitant. She had her own plans for escape, and aligning with others would only complicate things. But as Kale described the horrors that the Valturians had inflicted on countless worlds, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She agreed to help. Working with Kale and the other prisoners was a delicate task. Evie used her growing influence over the ship's systems to create small disruptions, opening a locked door here, disabling a camera there. These acts went unnoticed by the guards, but allowed the prisoners to move more freely and communicate without fear of being overheard. Kale introduced Evie to the others in the rebellion. Drex, a massive, armored being from a volcanic world, whose strength was matched only by his quiet loyalty. Iria, a winged creature with feathers that shimmered like crystal, who served as the group's scout and messenger. Vayek, a diminutive but brilliant engineer who had managed to reverse engineer some of the Valturian technology. Despite their differences, the group was united by a common goal: to overthrow their captors and reclaim their freedom. As Evie worked with them, she felt herself growing stronger, not just physically, but emotionally. She was no longer a victim of her circumstances. She was a force to be reckoned with. But the Valturians were not blind to her actions. Lord Valturian was a figure of legend among his people. Towering and clad in biomechanical armor, he exuded an aura of absolute authority. His word was law, and his ambition knew no bounds. He had watched Evie from the moment she arrived, intrigued by her defiance and the potential of the child she carried. While his subordinates viewed her with suspicion, Lord Valturian saw an opportunity. One evening, as Evie was returning to her quarters, she was intercepted by 2 guards and brought to a massive chamber. The walls were adorned with intricate carvings, and at the center of the room sat Lord Valturian on a throne that seemed to grow from the floor itself. "You have caused quite a stir," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Do you think I do not see what you are doing?" Evie met his gaze, refusing to show fear. "You are not the first to defy me," he continued, rising from his throne, "but you are different. There is a strength in you that I cannot ignore." He circled her, his eyes glowing with curiosity. "The child you carry is extraordinary. Together, you could rule worlds. Pledge yourself to me, and I will give you power beyond your wildest dreams." Evie's answer was immediate. "I'd rather die." Lord Valturian chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "I admire your spirit, but you will come to see that resistance is futile." He dismissed her, but the encounter left Evie shaken. She knew now that she was running out of time. Evie's encounter with Lord Valturian only fueled her determination. She returned to her quarters more resolute than ever, reaching out telepathically to Kale and the others to accelerate their plans. The rebellion was no longer just a means of escape. It was an act of defiance against a system that had enslaved countless beings. Kale's telepathic network became their lifeline. Through it, they coordinated sabotage efforts, mapping out the ship's weaknesses and exploiting the gaps in the guards' patrols. Iria scouted the upper decks, where the ship's command center was located, while Vayek worked tirelessly to craft weapons from stolen technology. Evie's role was unique. The ship continued to respond to her in ways no one else could replicate. She discovered she could influence the organic systems, coaxing doors to open and walls to shift. These abilities, tied to the child she carried, became the rebellion's greatest asset. But the closer they came to enacting their plan, the more dangerous the stakes became. One night, during a routine sabotage mission, Drex was captured. The rebellion watched helplessly through a telepathic link as he was dragged before Lord Valturian. "You think you can defy me?" the alien lord growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Your rebellion is nothing more than an irritation, a distraction I will crush." With a single gesture, Lord Valturian activated a device that disintegrated Drex's body in an instant. The link went silent, and Evie felt the weight of Drex's sacrifice like a physical blow. The rebellion's plans hinged on Evie's unique abilities. Kale theorized that the ship's connection to her could be exploited to trigger a catastrophic chain reaction, crippling its systems and giving them a chance to seize control. But as they prepared for the final phase of their plan, Evie's pregnancy entered its final stages. The child's energy pulsed within her, growing stronger by the hour. She could feel its consciousness brushing against her own, a faint but undeniable presence. One night, as she rested in her quarters, a sudden contraction racked her body. Pain radiated through her, but it wasn't just physical. It was as if the entire ship resonated with her agony. Lights flickered, and the hum of the walls became a deafening roar. Kale appeared at her door moments later, his luminous eyes wide with concern. "It's happening," he said. "The child is coming." The rebels gathered in a hidden chamber, Iria standing guard while Vayek prepared makeshift medical equipment. Evie's labor was unlike anything they had anticipated. The air crackled with energy, and the walls of the chamber seemed to pulse in time with her screams. When the child was born, the light was blinding. Solis's first cry echoed through the ship, a sound that resonated in every corner. The child's skin shimmered like molten silver, its elongated limbs glowing faintly. Its amber eyes, far too intelligent for a newborn, locked onto Evie's with an intensity that took her breath away. "You are magnificent," she whispered, cradling the baby against her chest. But their moment of wonder was cut short. Solis's birth had not gone unnoticed. Alarms blared, and the walls of the chamber shuddered as guards closed in. The rebellion erupted in chaos. Kale, Iria, and Vayek sprang into action, using every weapon and trick at their disposal to hold off the advancing guards. Evie, still weak from childbirth, clutched Solis tightly as she navigated the corridors, her abilities guiding her toward the ship's core. The plan was simple but desperate. Evie would use her connection to the ship to destabilize its organic systems, forcing a catastrophic failure that would cripple the vessel. As she reached the core, Lord Valturian appeared, blocking her path. "You cannot win," he said, his voice a thunderous growl. "This ship is my domain. Your defiance is meaningless." Evie met his gaze, her exhaustion replaced by a fierce determination. "You underestimated me," she said. "You underestimated all of us." The battle that followed was a clash of will and power. Lord Valturian's strength was overwhelming, but Evie fought with the ferocity of a mother protecting her child. Solis, cradled in her arms, glowed brighter with each passing moment, its energy radiating outward. In a final, desperate act, Evie placed her hand on the core and focused. The ship responded, its systems spiraling out of control. Alarms blared, and the walls began to collapse as energy surged through the vessel. Kale and the other rebels had already begun evacuating, commandeering escape pods and smaller ships. Evie, clutching Solis, ran toward the nearest escape pod, the walls crumbling around her. As she launched into space, the Valturian ship imploded in a blinding explosion. Chapter 11. Earthbound. Evie and Solis, along with the surviving rebels, made their way to Earth, but their return was far from peaceful. The crash landing of alien ships across the Nevada desert drew immediate attention, and within hours, military forces surrounded them. Evie stood protectively in front of Solis as soldiers approached, their weapons raised. "This is my child," she said firmly. "You will not take him from me." Kale stepped forward, his luminous presence intimidating even the most seasoned soldiers. "We come in peace," he said, his voice resonating in their minds. "But we will defend ourselves if necessary." After a tense standoff, the group was taken into custody and brought to a secure facility. Evie knew this was only the beginning. The destruction of the Valturian ship would not go unnoticed, and the remnants of their empire would come for them. Chapter 12. The New Alliance. As Earth's leaders debated what to do with the newcomers, Evie and her allies began forming their own plans. Kale revealed that the Valturians were part of a larger galactic hierarchy, an empire that would not take kindly to the loss of one of its most powerful houses. "We must unite," Kale said. "Earth cannot stand alone, but together, we can resist." Evie, now fully embracing her role as both a mother and a leader, agreed. She began reaching out to Earth's governments, offering knowledge of the Valturian Empire in exchange for protection. Slowly, allies began to emerge, not just from Earth, but from other corners of the galaxy where the Valturians' grip had faltered. The remnants of the House of Valturian were regrouping. Scouts reported sightings of vast fleets assembling in the Outer Rim, with smaller incursions probing Earth's defenses. The destruction of their flagship had enraged the Empire, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim Solis, their so-called starborn heir. Evie stood at the heart of the newly established Alliance Command, a coalition of Earth's military forces and alien factions who had suffered under Valturian rule. Kale Vryn served as her closest advisor, his telepathic abilities invaluable in fostering trust among the disparate groups. But unity was fragile. Earth's leaders were wary of their new allies, and some alien factions resented humans for being the cause of the Empire's wrath. Meanwhile, Evie grappled with the growing powers of Solis. The child, now physically resembling a 10-year-old despite being barely 2, was no ordinary being. Solis could bend light into weapons, manipulate energy fields, and even project visions of possible futures. Yet with each use of their power, the child seemed to grow more distant, their amber eyes filled with an ancient knowledge that frightened even Evie. "You carry a destiny beyond this war," Kale told Solis during one of their training sessions. "But destiny is a burden, not a gift. Be careful not to lose yourself to it." Solis nodded but said nothing, their gaze fixed on the stars. The Valturian fleet arrived in force, their ships blotting out the sun as they descended into Earth's atmosphere. The Alliance was ready, but the sheer scale of the invasion was overwhelming. Vast carriers unleashed waves of fighter drones, while colossal dreadnoughts bombarded the surface from orbit. Evie led the defense from the ground, coordinating with Kale and Iria, who piloted a strike team to disable the enemy's command ship. Solis, against Evie's wishes, joined the fight, their abilities turning the tide in key battles. The child's presence was both a blessing and a curse. Wherever Solis went, the Valturians focused their attacks, desperate to capture or destroy what they considered their greatest asset. During a critical moment, Solis unleashed a devastating burst of energy that destroyed an entire fleet. The explosion lit up the sky, a spectacle of power that left allies and enemies alike awestruck. But when the light faded, Solis collapsed, their body trembling with exhaustion. "I'm fine," they whispered. But Evie saw the toll it had taken. The final battle took place in orbit, above the ruins of the Valturian flagship where Evie had once been a prisoner. The Alliance launched a desperate assault on the Empire's command ship, a massive vessel known as the Sovereign Star. Evie led a boarding party to infiltrate the ship and confront the new Valturian leader, a warlord named Zoran Kaith, who had declared himself the Empire's ruler. Zoran was every bit as imposing as Lord Valturian, his body augmented with cybernetic enhancements that made him nearly invincible. As the battle raged outside, Evie and her team fought their way through waves of guards to reach the ship's core. Solis, still weakened from their earlier outburst, insisted on accompanying her. When they reached the core, Zoran was waiting. The confrontation was brutal, with Zoran's immense strength threatening to overwhelm them. But Evie fought with the ferocity of a mother protecting her child, and Solis used their abilities to weaken the warlord's defenses. In a desperate move, Evie and Solis combined their powers, channeling energy into the ship's core. The resulting overload destabilized the Sovereign Star, but the effort left them vulnerable. Zoran lunged at Solis, aiming to end the child's life. But Evie intercepted the blow, sacrificing herself to protect her child. "Live," she whispered to Solis, her voice filled with love and resolve. "You're the future." Solis, fueled by grief and rage, unleashed their full power. Light engulfed the core, consuming Zoran and the ship in a blinding explosion. Solis awoke on a lush, green world, the air filled with the sound of rustling leaves and distant birdsong. Kale stood beside them, his expression solemn. "You've done it," he said. "The Valturian Empire is broken. Their fleets are scattered, their leaders gone." "And my mother?" Solis asked, though they already knew the answer. Kale placed a hand on their shoulder. "She gave everything for you, for all of us. Her legacy lives on through you." Solis nodded, their amber eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. "I'll make her proud." In the years that followed, Solis became a symbol of hope across the galaxy. They led efforts to rebuild worlds ravaged by the Valturian Empire, forging alliances and spreading peace. Though their powers continued to grow, they carried Evie's memory with them, a reminder of the love and sacrifice that had shaped their path. And on quiet nights, beneath the stars, they would look to the heavens and feel her presence, a gentle light guiding them forward.